This morning is billed as Storehouse Sunday, and we're going to focus today on thinking about what, as a church, we do in Storehouse. And this sign here, where we have the donations given, explains a little bit about our Vineyard Storehouse. Primarily, what we're going to do now is talk about why we do Storehouse. So we're going to look at some scripture for 10 minutes, and then Marc is going to do some testimony, and some others who are volunteers in Storehouse are going to give some story and testimony about their experiences working in Storehouse. Storehouse, just briefly, is a compassion ministry, and we give furniture and clothing and household items and food to people who are struggling or in crisis. And this has been going since 1998, and Marc has been heading it up for the last 4 years. So we hope that you enjoy this morning. We hope that you enjoy the boring bit, which I'm going to do for, as I say, 10 minutes, and then the exciting bit with some stories and testimonies. And we hope that people, just learn a bit and enjoy hearing and seeing what people have done. So, I'm going to start with a person called Jim Wallace, who a number of years ago started a charity in Washington, D.C. And I was struck by something in a book he wrote called The Soul of Politics, which said that when he studied theology, a group of them got together and realised that in the Bible, if you take out the sections that talk about the poor, then actually you've got only 50% of the Bible left. And one of them actually literally cut out the passages from his Bible. And when he went around and spoke to people, he showed this Bible, which was only 50% full. And he said, lots of Christians preach a gospel without referencing the poor, without giving any mention or any consideration to the poor. And he said, if you do that, you've only got half of God's heart. And really, it's questionable whether you've got God's heart. So that impacted me a lot. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Bible says about the poor. In 10 minutes, you cannot represent 50% of the Bible. So we're going to start with a passage in Deuteronomy, which is where Moses is speaking to the people of Israel before they go into the promised land. And if you want to know how God would like people to live, what God's heart for a just and good society is, then it would be good to look at Deuteronomy, because Moses is telling the people before they go into the promised land, here we are at last, it's the land flowing with milk and honey, and we're going to go in, and this is how we're going to live. This is how God has ordained that as his people we're going to live well in the land. So, Deuteronomy 15, verses 4, 5 and 7 says this. However, there need be no poor people among you, for in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. So, that's interesting, isn't it? He starts with, there need be no poor people among you, but then he goes on to say, if anyone is poor, then make sure you're generous, make sure you share, make sure you give them what they need. He could have left it there, and he could have just gone on to talk about other things they were going to do in the land. But the next thing Moses says to the people is quite interesting in the next couple of verses. He says to them, if you don't do this, if you're not kind to the poor, this is what's going to happen. So he says in Deuteronomy 15, verses 9 to 11, if you don't be generous to the poor, they may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you'll be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work, and in everything you put your hand to. So there, it's being underlined that if people aren't generous when there's not a just and fair society towards the poor, and the poor pray to God, then God will judge the people who are not sharing. It's a bit like if you're a parent, isn't it? And your children are not sharing their stuff. It's very straightforward. One should be sharing with the other. And it's the same in society. God's heart is for there to be justice and fairness in society. So looking at this verse, where it says that if they pray to the Lord, he will find you guilty of sin. What does that say to us about whose side God is on? Very often don't we say that God has no favourites, but actually in Scripture it quite often tells us that God favours the victim and God favours the poor. So what it's actually saying is that God is on the side of the poor, and when the poor cry out to God, he hears their cry. He cares about them desperately. He wants to intervene. He wants us to be part of that answer as well, which we'll look at. He doesn't just leave it there. Don't worry about the next slide. We're going to go on to slide number 4 and look at what Jesus said about the poor. When Jesus stood up and gave his main teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, the first thing he said was, "Blessed are those who are poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God." And Jesus' mission statement that he said about himself, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor." And then he unpacked what that meant. So Jesus' teaching and Jesus' mission was primarily, firstly, about going to the poor. Just a little bit about the expression the poor. The Bible uses the term the poor, and sometimes when we use that term it can sound very patronising. We really don't mean it to be patronising. In fact, if you think of the terms rich and poor, it's a bit like thinking of the terms big and small. So a child might be small in relation to his parents, but it might be big in relation to their hamster. So it's a relative expression. Rich and poor is a relative expression. And there is poverty in this country. And yet, actually, we live in a world where probably 10% of the riches are given to 90% of the people. And so we live in the top 10% of the world. So in relative terms, there are people a lot poorer than people in this country. However, there are many people in this country that don't have enough. So when we're thinking of the term poor, what we're thinking about is people who have been disempowered because they don't have enough basic things to live with. So that's food, shelter, care, all of those things. And the lack of those things disempowers them. So when Jesus is talking about the poor, he's not just talking about the spiritually poor. Sometimes Christians say when the Bible talks about the poor, they mean the spiritually poor. But Jesus didn't dissect life like that. When the Bible talks about the human person, it talks about them being body, soul and spirit. And if you can't eat, then that affects your soul and your spirit. And we recognise that when we meet people, we recognise that people become damaged because they haven't eaten enough. And that's what happens in our country. Things have escalated. We've given away twice as much food this year, not because lots more people have come because they've just felt like coming. It's because there are more people that are hungry for various reasons. So Jesus, his heart was for the poor. When Jesus met with people, he often challenged them. And when the rich man came to Jesus, he had a message for him, which is he said, if you want to be perfect, this is Matthew 19:21. If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And then come and follow me. When I started studying theology, I was quite challenged. I felt that Steve and I had a lot. I felt that we needed to be challenged in our lives. And I was going to college and I heard on the radio, Thought for the Day, and the thought was, the good news, the gospel is good news to the poor, but it's a challenge to the rich. And that verse backs that up, doesn't it? Jesus said to the rich man, go and sell everything you have, and then you'll have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. So I thought to myself, we should be prepared to give away everything we've got, and being a very simplistic faith, that's something I felt like we should be prepared to do. But then the more I studied, the more I realised that there are different ways of giving everything. And actually, Jesus didn't say that to everybody. He said to the woman who emptied the ointment in worship at his feet, he said to her, he said to the people who criticised her for wasting the money on pouring the ointment over his feet, the poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. That's in Matthew 14:7. Some people quote that to say, you don't always have to worry about the poor, but I don't think Jesus meant that. I think he meant that we always have to be addressing the injustice. We always have to be living towards the poor and looking after the poor, but we must also worship him, take time out, and make Jesus be the centre of our lives. And I think this is made clear when Jesus talks about the parable of the sheep and the goats, and he says that at the end of time, when God judges, he will say to one group of people, you didn't feed me when I was hungry, you didn't give me water when I was thirsty, this is Matthew 25:34-36. When I was a stranger, you didn't visit me and invite me in. And he said this to the goats. And they say to him, but Lord, we prayed for people. We saw people being healed. We did great things in your name. Jesus criticised them because they didn't look after the poor and said that they wouldn't be with him in the eternal kingdom. But to those who really didn't even realise they'd been doing it, Jesus said, you visited me when I was a stranger. When I needed clothes, you clothed me. When I was sick, you looked after me. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. And that's basically what we want to be doing when we're doing our Storehouse project. We want to show unconditional love to people, not in a patronising way, not in a way that says that they're in any way less than us, because we feel that everybody before God is precious. God is on the side of the poor because he wants a just and a fair society. So that's something that we're really trying to do. There's a verse in Micah 6:8, which says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And those two things, to act justly and to love mercy, to love justice and to love mercy, show us how we should live towards the poor. And one is about structures. So if there's justice, then it enables people to live fairly. And that's about the law and all of those things. And some people are called to change those things and to be champions for the poor in those areas. In a sense, what we do in Storehouse is the showing mercy, because we're picking up the pieces of when society gets broken and things go wrong, and we're doing the basic things to offer a step up, to give people a chance, to feed them, to try and empower them rather than disempower them, which is what's happened to them. I've got a picture of the White House, which is in the richest place in the world. And that's where Jim Wallace, who I mentioned earlier, started his ministry. And in the richest place in the world, the most powerful place in the world, there's extreme poverty. So wherever we are in the world, there is poverty. And we can't get away from that. And Jesus calls us to work and to be a champion for the poor. And there's a story in Jim Wallace's book where a wife of one of the officials in Washington, in the White House, sees some people who are protesting against the terrible situation that they have, and she listens to them and she thinks that's absolutely terrible and she doesn't know what to do. And she goes home and she talks to her husband, and he hadn't realised the implications of their plight either. And by just through who she was, her position and her situation, she was able to influence the government, and it was able to be addressed and they were able to be helped. So whoever we are, in whatever situation we are, we might find that there are ways that we can be champions for the poor. One of my Bible heroes is called Joanna. She's the wife of somebody at Herod's palace, and she was a follower of Jesus and a disciple. And there was a group of women who followed Jesus, and they helped to pay for his ministry. So whoever we are, we can do something towards the mission of Jesus to the poor. And I'd like to challenge us this morning, as we listen to the testimony of Marc and how God's heart for the poor has impacted his life, and also the testimony of the other people. I'd like to challenge us all to think about how we can be champions for the poor.
Okay, well, thank you, Lyn. That was very challenging to me, as I'm sure it was for yourselves also. I'm going to talk a little bit about Storehouse towards the end of the talk, but I felt I ought to share my background as to how, in the very early days of my life, it's led me through to the stage where I am now working in Storehouse. Although much of it is about me, whatever I say, it isn't for my own glory, for my own benefit, but it's how God has had his hand on my life in the good and bad times to where we are now. Last week, Mick Elias spoke about trusting God and the transitions he's been through. Much of my story has similarities. I was born into a Christian home in Maidstone in Kent. My father was an Assemblies of God pastor. I had the misfortune of being the middle child. Now, if anyone is in that same situation, you know what it's like. You've got an older brother or sister. In my case, my older brother was 8 years older than me, and my two younger brothers were 3 years and 4 years younger, and I was bang slam in the middle. My parents were elderly. My father was often unwell, he was not a fit man, and my mother was also disabled, she was partially sighted. So normal children's activities were restricted, especially on Sundays. However, at 6.5 years at Sunday school, I invited Jesus into my life, but then began a period where my life became not easier, but more difficult. I found myself being bullied, mostly verbally, but also occasionally physically at school, due to the lack of confidence that I had in myself and not doing the same things as others. There used to be boys in the school whose parents would say, "We'd like to take you to the seaside with our son." And I'd say, "Yep, I'd love to do that. It's on a Sunday." And that was just a no. Never, ever on a Sunday. Sunday was church, church and church. We had no television in our house. We were basically poor. And because of that, I found myself with no friends, although there were one or two boys who did take pity on me. When I got to secondary school, things were a little bit easier. I can't quite pinpoint why they were easier, but I do remember on one occasion there was a conversation in the playground about boys. I went to an all-boys school. Boys in the playground who said to one said to the other, "Do you go to church?" And I thought, oh, it's going to come out to me in a minute. And this boy said, "Yes, I do." And I thought, that's good. He's been able to admit that. And he said, "How often?" And he said, "Oh, about once a fortnight, maybe once a month." And I thought, oh. And so it came to me, how often do you go? And I said, well, I go every week. I didn't tell them I go twice every Sunday and once in the midweek as well. That would just be too much. The other thing at school was explaining what a pastor is. And I would say, well, it's like a church minister. Yeah, but what's a church minister? Oh, it's like a vicar. Oh, why wasn't my dad a vicar? It would have been so much easier. But to be someone leading a church that was relatively unknown in those days just became more difficult. School days were not happy ones. Comparing myself to my other brothers, I laugh about it now because I've no regrets. But my 3 brothers all went to the grammar school, they were all musical, and they're all sporty. And I was none of those. In those days, if you were a slow learner, you just had to get on with it. These days, you get a bit of support from classroom teaching assistants and so on. But in those days, it was just too bad. If you were no good, you just had to get on with it. So looking back, I experienced rejection, I experienced loneliness, and a feeling of hopelessness. I left school at 16 and went into the catering industry. That seemed to be the way that my life was going, and I found myself making a cake one day which came out rather well, and I won a prize, and so I thought, well, let's do the catering. I don't know what else to do, let's do that. And with lack of qualifications, there wasn't much open for me to do. But however, I did a full-time chef's course, but halfway through my father, he died, and I had to choose which way I should go for the future. All the other students who were in the same class with me at college, they went to work in hotels in London's West End. But due to the need to be near my elderly mother, I felt I ought to be nearer home, so I got a job in the local hospital as a cook. I changed my job at 19, a year later, as at college they were taught us that if we want to get on, we ought to change our jobs every 2 or 3 years in order to get experience. So I changed my job, and previously I was cooking for 100 people with other people, cooking for 100, but I found a job where I was cooking for 1,000 people. In those days, hospitals, large psychiatric hospitals, had 1,000 or 2,000 beds, and they were just awful, really. But I worked there in a hospital in Maidstone for 2 or 3 years, and it was a tough environment. When I first went, it was hard. It was hard to do the job that I wasn't used to, and it was hard to work with the guys, full-grown men, who had just knew stuff about life, and I was very timid and shy. And I started work at 6 o'clock in the morning. I had to get up at 5 o'clock and catch a bus at 6:30, and I had 25 minutes to walk to the town. And I decided I'd pray. I would pray every single day until the change occurred that made it better. And it did. And after 2 or 3 weeks, life became a lot easier. And I was able to do my job. At that point, looking back, I chose the Christian way. Up until then, my parents had really forced it upon me. But at that stage, I chose the Christian way. I met Julie through church. And she too had experienced a lack of friends due to her father being in the army and never staying in one place for very long. Where are we going? Yes. So after I'd been in that particular job, I sought promotion and moved to North London as an assistant head cook. And there I received rapid promotion. And at that time we got married. And I then took a job at age 24. I was one of the youngest hospital catering managers in the UK. After 4 years, we moved to get promotion, and I took a job that was we'd been responsible for the catering in hospitals, in 5 hospitals in Red Hill area. And we moved to Crawley. And through a miracle, we had our 2 children. Family times were good. And I got involved in church work, and I was church youth leader, and then became a church administrator. However, job demands were put on me, and as a manager of running the service, I felt I had to put in the hours. We struggled to get people. We lived, actually, it was in the Greenbelt area, south of London, and it was difficult to recruit people on low wages. and I often ended up doing the work. And so pressure on me was difficult, and on the family, and I didn't spend as much time as I really should have done. And then in 1989 I took a sideways move to Aylesbury, and life became a bit easier. However, when our children reached their teens, life became more difficult for them, for me, for Julie. It was just one big mess. And Julie would know this and agree with me, it just was a mess. And after a few years, it built up to a point when we just couldn't live together, and I moved out. And as far as I was concerned, our marriage was over. However, after 4 months, we reunited, and Julie and I decided we would do something to make our marriage strong. We thought of a few things, but none of them really gelled within us. And then I read a Christian book a few months later, and I felt God calling us to work with homeless rough sleepers. Homeless rough sleepers in Oxford. I don't know, I always get emotional at this point. A year later, I sensed God calling me to work full-time with the poor. And so I made a decision to leave a well-paid, secure job and trust God for what I needed for the future, finances and stuff. At that time, our youngest daughter became pregnant when she was at college, and our eldest daughter moved out of home, and with the boyfriend that she was with at that time, not the current one. I've been asked to stress because people may get the wrong impression, but the boyfriend at the time, he was a bit of a lad, and unfortunately he was in trouble with the police, and she went on the run with him, and he was eventually arrested and he went to prison for 4 years, which he served 4 years for. So it was a pretty serious thing. I left my job in November 2001, and the salary at that time was a quarter of what it was previously. From August 1999 to 2004, on the streets of Oxford at night time, we went out twice a week to meet lonely, rejected, homeless people. And we witnessed some amazing changes. We saw people come to know God, we saw people come off of drugs, we had some happy times and we had some sad times. We saw people die and people overdose on heroin and other stuff. But we saw a need, and this is the important thought I have for you. We saw a need and we did something. We called the ministry Breakthrough, so to be recognised by other organisations mainly, but we also felt that it meant something. It was breaking through in people's lives, what we were doing. Largely our ministry was to provide in practical ways, a bit like Storehouse, but on a smaller scale. And we did that right up until November, just gone. And we still are doing some stuff. We still have contacts with people who we provided for. We prayed for direction at every challenge. We thought if it's not God's will, we thought he would stop it. At one time we thought about moving to Oxford because we thought it was his will, but he put a stop to it. Otherwise we continued. The last 12 years we've not lacked, and despite the lack of finances, money isn't everything. For 9 years I worked as a volunteer with SMART, which is a charity which helps people on drug and alcohol problems. I've done research work into homelessness through Ruskin College in Oxford. I've worked for Christians Against Poverty through the Oxford Vineyard Church. I've worked in children's homes and hostels, and I've even done warehouse work in order to get experience in all sorts of things. February 2008, on our first visit to this church, we felt we needed to move from Oxford Vineyard to here. Within 30 seconds of coming into the building, I knew that this was the place to be and to work with the poor here. And the person who I met on the door, he's not here this morning, but I spoke to him last week, and he agreed and he remembered that conversation. He said it wasn't his normal conversation when people walk in the church, but he spoke directly to me, and it was God's way of speaking to us that we knew this was the place to be. So I volunteered for Storehouse, and I did 2.5 years doing everything, even sorting out clothes and stuff that I just don't do these days. I say jokingly, I don't wash, I don't iron, and I don't sort clothes, but then I did remember sorting clothes. And as Linda said, 4 years ago I became the coordinator. Friends now, I have literally hundreds. I've got audio people, I know hundreds and hundreds of people, some by their first name. I try and remember people's names, and on the streets of Oxford, I could remember people's names from week in, week out. And the way I do it is remember the people you need to remember, and don't remember the names you don't need to remember. It's as simple as that. So, sorry, what's your name? Rejection, loneliness, hopelessness. Now, no. There is sometimes I feel a bit like that, but I'm not perfect, but things have definitely changed in my life. I'm currently reading a book. It's not a Christian book. It's about a former homeless man who at 17 had no friends. He had thought that drugs, drink and wild living was the answer to his loneliness. The next 10 years were a disaster as he became suicidal and dependent on heroin. Had I have worked in London's West End at the age of 18, it may have been disaster. Maybe not drugs, because we didn't have those things in those days, but maybe other things. Through the death of my father at age 17, I chose God's way. At Storehouse, we regularly help people who are lonely and whose situations are hopeless. As Lyn has already mentioned, we began in 1998. It was in a garage in Aston Clinton, and since then it's grown to our premises here that take up about 20% of this building. We're recognised by the local council, housing associations, social services, women's aid, probation and so on, and known for the good work we do. Each week we help about 60 families or individuals. We're open to the public twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and at other times by appointment. However, there is work going on Monday, Wednesday and Friday as well. We don't shut up on those days. We do sorting and administration. Goods are donated by all manner of people, not just by those within this church. There's never a shortage of furniture coming in. We often reject goods if not to the right standard, as we want people in need to have decent stuff. If you have furniture to donate, the way to do this is either phone us on the Storehouse number, leave a message, or fill out a card like this one here, which is over there in a box on the floor, and write out what you'd like us to collect. Yes, if you look at our web pages, read our leaflet. Here's one here. I had to change it at the front. It was a wrong leaflet put out. It was the old ones, but now they've got the new ones. I'm a bit embarrassed about that. If you look at our web pages, read our leaflet, or listen to our answer phone messages, you'll get an indication of what we do and what we don't take. Many people ask us what food we require. Well, each month we update our web pages to show what people are most in need of. Most of our food comes through this and other churches, as well as collecting bins at Tesco's, Bucks County Council and Vale of Aylesbury Housing Trust. Also, our annual Harvest Thanksgiving appeal to schools brings in loads in the autumn. In the last year, we've given away more food than we ever have done before. There are so many people in need. Nevertheless, we only give to those on very low or no income, and we review each person's needs regularly. We have 3 teams of volunteers. We have servers, we have people who work on the van and furniture, and we have those who sort out clothes and food. Some do just a couple of hours, whenever they can, and others are almost full-time. I'm going to ask 3 of them to come now, and first of all, Lizzie to explain her experience and how she came into Storehouse, and then Graham, and then Anne. Lizzie.
Hi everyone, I'm Lizzie. I just want to tell you a little bit about my story, about how I came to be a part of Storehouse. About 3 years ago, I joined this church as part of a cafe, and I was in a really lost place then. My mum was really, really poorly. She was dying of cancer, and then about a month after I joined this church, she died. And that Christmas, I received a Christmas hamper. And that was just such a blessing for me, because that's just exactly what I needed, and it was just from this church. And then about 6 months ago, I went through some really difficult time again. I just got married, and I was really struggling in my job. And in the end, I got signed off work. I was really depressed. I was really, really unhappy. And this church just really brought me back from the grave in a way. Really brought me back. And I just really felt from the music we had today, it sort of just really sort of put my head above the water, really. I just sort of like my faith, the prayer, and all the friends that I've had at this church really, really helped. And then I had a conversation with Esther actually in December and said that I really, really want to give back to this church. It really helped me. And one of the ways was to help at Storehouse. And I thought, okay then, my job's changed, and I'm a nanny, so I've got time during the day that I can help. Turned out, I spoke to Marc, turns out Thursday mornings was a good opportunity. So I came along to see what it was like, and it was totally not what I expected. There were just so many people in need out there, and it's been such a blessing for me to be able to be a part of this church and to give back and to help all those people in need, either with food parcels, with furniture, with clothing. And I feel, just by being a part of it, I've touched so many lives. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be able to share it with you.
I've got 10 seconds.
Well, I was told I had 1 minute. That's it. So if I had a T-shirt, all it would say, I'm the Monday driver. Because there are other people who drive. So what do I do, my particular bit? Well, with the team of people, there's very often you need some helpers on the van. I'm just a driver, I'm not a muscle man. So we have people like Marc over there, and Ash, if he was here, I don't know if he's here, and other people like me. And through this last year, we had all sorts of volunteers who not only help Terry over the back there to load the van, but also to deliver it to these places in and around Aylesbury. And if you think that's easy, I'm not an Aylesbury man, and I frequently get lost, and despite Tom and Max, how often we have to cry out, we need a postman. And very often they pop around the corner, it's amazing really, they just appear. You know, they get directions from heaven. You know, you need to go there because these poor souls are in need. Anyhow, what do we do? So with these young men, these healthy, strong men, they hunt, well, they're not that strong really, some in a bad old way, but they hunt the furniture, bedding, all sorts of things, up one flight of stairs, sometimes 2 flights of stairs. It's not easy. And going around these narrow little corridors is very difficult. And sometimes we have to take doors off, even the main doors off, to get the furniture in. But we do it gladly. They do it gladly. We all operate because we represent Storehouse, but over and above that, we represent God's goodness in these areas. And I'll say for myself and for the others, it's a privilege in a very, very small way to do this. So we just want to say thank you to Almighty God for his kindness, his mercy, his goodness, and what he provides for anybody who calls upon him. And that's so my bit is that little bit in it, but thank you for the privilege of being able to serve this community.
I took my glasses off so I couldn't see through them.
Storehouse is a place where God answers prayer, and we know that he wants to bless people, and he knows people's needs. He knows people's needs more than we do. A specific testimony, somebody called me after church on Sunday last week, said, I've just been given a house, I need to come to Storehouse. Being given a house means you have walls. You might not have anything to put in that house. So I couldn't do anything for her on Sunday. So I said, can I pray with you? Let's ask God to reserve what you need for Tuesday. I can't reserve anything. He knows exactly what you need. So we prayed. And then I saw her when she came in on Tuesday. And God had reserved beautiful furniture for her. It was wonderful to see what he had reserved. I didn't put a label on anything, but it was available for her, just what she wanted. And then after that, I was able to pray a blessing over her in her home. And she left that morning with a great big smile on her face, saying, man, I am so excited. And I go home, my heart is bursting with sometimes to see how God touches people, how he wants to bless, and how he wants to answer prayer. It's a place of his heart, and it is a privilege to be there. So, thank you.
That story that Anne's put out is not just one-off 1 week, it's every week. Every time we're open, there's a story of something like that, how God has provided. Now we're making changes in Storehouse, and the space we have at the moment to sort out clothing and food has been inadequate for some time. So we're expanding and we're going upstairs as well as being downstairs to make more room for the increase that is coming, and it's already here and is coming, and this is due to be completed in August. We're always in need of volunteers, particularly now to sort out donations, to be part of the van team, or to serve Tuesdays or Thursdays directly to people in need. Also to pray. We pray on every second Sunday of the month between 10 and 10:15 in Storehouse, led by Julie, with Anne and others. And if you can't do much else, then I'm sure if you feel led you can pray. Shortly after we finish this morning, we're going to show people around Storehouse, and Julie and Marc at the back in the yellow t-shirt will give tours after the prayer time. You may want to respond to some of what either Lyn or I have said. You may feel God calling you to some Christian ministry, something you've not experienced before. We invite you to come at the end for prayer. You may be experiencing loneliness, rejection, or hopelessness. We invite you to come to the front for prayer. You may feel inadequate for God to use you. We invite you to come for prayer. Thank you.